Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for being here. Welcome to this panel presented by the AFL-CIO Union Lawyers Alliance and the National Black Law Students Association. My name is Kyle Campbell, and I'm a 2020 graduate of the University of Alabama School of Law, where I served as treasurer of my BALSA chapter. And I'm currently Associate General Counsel at the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, or AFSCME, in Washington, D.C. AFSCME is the nation's largest public sector labor union, representing over 1.3 million members throughout the country. Our membership runs the gamut from clerical employees and janitors to dentists and public defenders. And as a quick plug, we are always looking to hire law clerks. We've completed our hiring for this summer, but we will be bringing on remote clerks in the fall and probably next spring. And we'll be hiring for next summer if you're a 1L. I was a law clerk at AFSCME during law school, and it was an irreplaceable experience in my career. Obviously, I liked it enough to come back. So please get in touch with me if you're interested. I will put my email in the chat a little later. But moving on to the people you're all here to hear from tonight, I'm honored to introduce our panelists, starting with Caitlin Walker. Caitlin is a graduate of Dartmouth College and the George Washington University Law School. As a law student, she was a Peggy Browning Fellow with the AFL-CIO, worked as a law clerk with SEIU, and interned for a small labor law firm. She then clerked for the Honorable Tiffany H. Anderson on the Circuit Court for Prince George's County and the Honorable Melanie M. Shaw Jeter in the Maryland Court of Special Appeals. Recently, Caitlin served as the Associate General Counsel for the Committee on Education and Labor in the U.S. House of Representatives, and she now works for the U.S. Department of Labor as a policy advisor to the Secretary. Next, we have Bart Sheard. Bart is a legislative representative for the AFL-CIO, where he advocates for workers on Capitol Hill. Prior to joining the AFL, Bart worked at a union-side firm, Sherman Dunn, representing unions and workers in contract negotiations, arbitration, and before the NLRB in federal courts. Bart also served as labor counsel to U.S. Senator Patty Murray, ranking member of the Senate Health, Education, and Labor and Pensions, or HELP Committee. He's a 2015 graduate of the George Washington University Law School. Next, we have Jason Veeney. Jason is a partner at Murphy Anderson in Washington, D.C. Jason has long represented labor unions and workers in arbitrations and proceedings before various federal and state courts, the NLRB, the New York State Division on Human Rights, and the New York Public Employment Relations Board. Prior to joining Murphy Anderson, Jason served as an in-house counsel at the United Federation of Teachers and also worked for TWU Local 100 in New York City, where he regularly arbitrated cases for the union. Jason is a dedicated board member of DC Jobs with Justice and serves on the steering committee of Workplace Street Law. Next, we have Samantha Delaney. Samantha was appointed General Counsel of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, Moving Picture Technicians, Artists, and Allied Crafts, or IATSE for short, in August 2014. With a membership of over 150,000, IATSE is the largest labor union representing behind-the-scenes workers in the entertainment and related industries. Ms. Delaney's position at IATSE involves locals that represent workers in every facet of motion picture, television, broadcast, and live entertainment industries. Samantha received a master's degree in letters from law from Columbia Law School, where she was a Harlan Fiske Stone Scholar, her law degree from Georgetown University Law Center, where she was a member of the Georgetown Journal of Law and Policy in International Business and the Criminal Justice Clinic, and her undergraduate degree, cum laude, in political science from Loyola University in New Orleans. In 2019, Samantha was elected a fellow of the College of Labor and Employment Lawyers. She is also a member of the board of directors of the AFL-CIO Union Lawyers Alliance, who are presenting this panel. And last but certainly not least, we have Mark Gaston Pierce, who is the executive director of the Workers' Rights Institute at Georgetown Law School. In 2010, he was appointed a member of the National Labor Relations Board by President Obama, and then chair of the board in 2011. Pierce graduated from law school at the University of Buffalo and worked as an attorney for the NLRB for 15 years before starting the firm Creighton, Pierce, Johnson, and Giroux. In addition to his work at Georgetown, Mr. Pierce currently serves as a labor arbitrator on AAA and FMCS panels. He is also, and I can vouch for this personally, an accomplished painter and has incorporated labor and racial justice themes into many of his pieces. So thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. I'd like to start by asking each of you how you discovered the labor movement and why it is that you decided to become a labor lawyer out of all the options that you had. So Samantha, let's start with you.
Good evening, everyone. It is indeed my honor to be here and to be a part of this conversation. Kyle, I grew up really in the labor movement. An uncle who is now 87 left the Jim Crow South to work in auto plants in Flint, Michigan. And because of the decision he made in the 1940s, that changed the trajectory of my family's story, and it changed my story as well. My family is replete with auto workers, with teachers, with nurses, all of whom are in the union. And so it was not, it really wasn't a far stretch for me to think about a career in labor. It was kind of a circuitous route getting here, but I grew up really with the knowledge of unions. And so when we would hear of the auto strikes when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, that was personal because I had family who actually were impacted because they were walking those picket lines.
Thank you. Bart, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle, and good evening, everyone. My entry into the labor movement was a little roundabout. After I graduated college in 2009, with the economic recession, there weren't many jobs, so I decided to do some volunteering for a year. So I came to Washington, D.C., and I served as an AmeriCorps Vista at a nonprofit that serves homeless and at-risk youth here in the district. And one thing I realized in doing that work was that I had no problem getting up every day and going to work. It wasn't a slog. I wasn't making a lot of money, but I at least knew that I was going to work for someone else that really needed it and going to do good work. And so I enjoyed that part of it. And then also while I was in that job, I realized that the issues that were affecting some of the most vulnerable people in DC, like education issues, housing issues, healthcare, access to sustainable jobs with dignity, nutritional inequality, violence prevention. The common denominator between all of these issues was income inequality. And so, I grew up in a union household. My parents met as train drivers in New York City. They were actually members of TW Local 100, which Jason represented. And if my parents weren't in the union, I wouldn't have been able to go to college or to be where I am today. And so I decided to go to law school and to practice labor law because the labor movement is the best path to the middle class, and it's the best way to address income inequality. And so that's how I got here.
Thanks, Bart. Mark, how about you?
Well, I kind of backed into it. One would think, given what my pedigree was, that it would have come to me pretty clearly. Both of my parents were union members. My father was ground crew at an airline, and he had to be in the union for that. My mother worked in a shoe factory, and I'm sure that I have a few fillings in my mouth that I received from the dental as a result of the dental plan that was negotiated by the union on her behalf. And certainly my first pair of glasses were as a result of that. So I went to Cornell, and you would think, well, this guy, he eventually became the chairman of the NLRB. So he clearly went to Cornell's ILR school. Well, I didn't. I was arts and science, and every summer for at least two of the 3 summers that I was in undergraduate school, I worked for a union for Local 3, the electricians. They had negotiated a college helper program where I could do construction work and get 4th-year apprentice pay and work construction work. Of course, I didn't do real dangerous stuff other than hold the ladders and make sure that I didn't mess up the coffee order. But I got 4th-year apprentice pay. And, the women didn't think I was all that hot because I was kind of dirty and grungy, but I got a lot more money during the summer than most of the other people who had summer jobs. my uncle was a business agent for Local 3 IBEW. He instilled in me early that collective action and collective bargaining was very important. But I never thought of it in terms of my career. But it wasn't only his lesson; it was lessons that I learned on the job. I remember working at a refuse plant in Brooklyn near Starrett City, and it was a sewage plant. So on Mondays it was not pleasant to be there after the weekend. And we came in at one time 1 minute late, and they decided that they were going to dock everybody an hour's pay. And technically, the employer could do that. And everybody was pretty upset because, folks had been busting hard to get the work done. So later on in the day, a straw bus came by and said, okay, I'm going to need some people for overtime. And of course, I'm in college, so I wanted to get as much money as I could. And I said, well, and everybody else on the crew looked at me like this. And I shut up. And every one of them said, sorry, I got to pick up my kids. Sorry, I got other commitments. And the scrub boss got the message. If you don't work with labor, labor's not going to work with you. And I graduated from school, went to law school thinking that I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. Learned real quickly that I didn't want to be a criminal lawyer. And fortunately, what I had going for me is poverty, because I had to get a job while I was in law school. And I ended up, as Providence would have it, at the National Labor Relations Board under the work study program as an intern. There I was investigating cases. I learned this statute called the National Labor Relations Act that I never really focused on before. But I saw that there was this whole office of all these busy people meeting with people, investigating cases. I had the opportunity to talk with workers, hear their situations, figure out from the statute whether or not I could assist them. I was running elections in Buffalo at the time. There was a lot of plants and a lot of plants having elections. And sometimes I didn't even know what the plant made or what it produced. I just knew that there were a lot of people there. There was a lot of noise. And I was running this election at 4 o'clock in the morning. But it was great. And then I had an idea of exactly what I wanted to do. Then it was fortunate for me because I happened to be at a school that provided a lot of labor law courses or labor law related courses. I took labor law 1, labor law 2, lawyers' roles in negotiations, collective bargaining, public sector labor law, administrative law, to name a few. I understand that there's a lot of that gone from the curriculum of law schools these days. And it's unfortunate because it's needed. But there, I was really convinced that this is exactly what I wanted to do. And I felt that I had a purpose in law school. And when I got out with my Brooklyn chip on my shoulder, I headed right back down to New York City, only to discover I couldn't get a job in labor law down there because everybody who was down there had an inside track who wanted to do labor law. I took the civil service exam. I applied for the New York City Office of Collective Bargaining, and I tried to get into the various regional offices down there of the National Labor Relations Board. There's both a Manhattan and a Brooklyn regional office, and there's the Newark office, which was easy to commute to. But it was during the height of the recession, jobs were scarce. But guess what regional office wanted me? Buffalo. So I went back to Buffalo. And why? Because I wanted to get into labor law on the ground floor. I wanted to get my labor law experience in directly and quickly. And so I went up there, and that's I guess that's where it started. Now, of course, I thought that, well, I'm getting back to New York City. I'm going to stay here for maybe a couple, 3 years and get back down to New York City. Well, I was in that agency for 15 years before I left for the private sector. I don't recommend that as your route, but the point that I'm making is that I was there for 15 years primarily because it was a great place to work. You were able to try your own cases, do your own researches. You wrote cases, you drafted decisions as a law clerk would for a judge. You held hearings as a hearing officer for representation cases, and you didn't carry anybody else's bag. You were there in the forefront, and you were able to discern what an unfair labor practice was through the mouths of workers who knew nothing about the National Labor Relations Act. They just knew that they were being treated unfairly. And it was a fulfilling experience. I'm going to stop now, Kyle. I know I ran off on a little question.
No, I appreciated that. We didn't even have labor law at my law school. So the idea of having public sector labor law is, I'm very jealous of that. But moving on, Caitlin, how about you?
Okay, hey y'all. So really quick, I have to give a disclaimer. I'm here in my personal capacity and nothing I'm saying is affiliated with or endorsed by the Biden administration. Woo! Okay, now that I got that out of the way. So basically all my life I had to fight. If you've seen The Color Purple, you know my story. No, JK. But in in real life though, it really is. So I'm from Cleveland. And I come from, yes, I see some Cleveland people out there. I come from a background of working class, amazing Black people. We escaped slavery. We escaped terrorists. We came to Cleveland with who knows what, really nothing. And my dad, who's a brilliant man, he went to the Navy. He didn't go to college, but that has nothing to do with his brilliance. And he worked this great job where he was a union member. So he was a lineman. So the kind of people who, when the lights are out in Texas, like right now, they're working in the storm, putting the lines back up. And my dad had been working as a lineman for 15 years. I was probably like 8 or 9 years old, and he was illegally laid off with hundreds of other linemen. So that's like, traumatic AF, to say the least, because my daddy doesn't have a job. And at the time, my mom was also out of work. So nobody in my household was working. And, I learned about the UI system, unemployment insurance, real quick during that time period. It was just like a wake up call. My parents were very honest with me because I'm an only child. They were like, look, we laid off, girl. We ain't got no money. We're going to figure it out. My dad, was working in the interim. But because of his union membership, they were litigating the case on his behalf. Now, all of you are law students and know litigation takes years. So what's crazy is there was like a 2-year span while his union attorneys were litigating this case. And in that 2 years, my dad was hustling, snow plowing, mowing grass, working as a plumber, like all these things to like keep our house afloat or whatever and our family together. And his union lawyers won. So he got his job back. And I just remember that momentous day. Thinking about it, it was like we hit the lottery. Like my dad got his job back. He got his all his credits still counted. So like toward retirement, my dad just retired. Shout out dad. He just retired with dignity and a real pension, something I probably will never get unless all of you join the labor movement and fight so we can even have pensions. Especially the kind my dad has, defined benefit, okay? It ain't that 401k mess, it's the real deal pension. That's what unions get you. So basically around the 3rd grade is when I was like, lawyer, I want to be that. Even though LOL, my parents had gone to law school. I don't know who I thought it was, but they were gassing me up. They're like, yeah, girl, you gonna do that. So I was like, okay. And in high school, actually, long story short, because my dad had a union job, I could live in a middle-class suburb and go to a school with amazing resources. So I was playing tennis and my dad could buy me rackets and all these things. And I played tennis with a girl whose mom was my dad's union lawyer. So in high school, I became friends with a person who won that case. And I was like, well, that's exactly the kind of law I'm going to do. Because in the 3rd grade, I was going to be a lawyer. So in 10th grade, I was like, I'm going to be a union lawyer. I went to college and got even more angsty because, then you find out more about the real world and how hard it is and how hard work is. So I was like still motivated to do that. I flirted with the idea for a second of getting a PhD, but that, fizzled out. And then I came to DC to law school. And I thought I was going to be a union lobbyist, LOL, preview to Bart. So I thought that's what I was going to do. And I worked on the Hill. I worked for Congresswoman Marsha L. Fudge, soon to be Secretary Fudge, hopefully, because she was my Congresswoman. And, she couldn't pay me. She was like, look, I cannot pay you, but I will get you connected to the Labor Committee, because she sat on the what was at the time called the Education and Workforce Committee. So I worked with her, and I also worked at Starbucks, which also really fueled me to become a union lawyer, because it was like, if you make the minimum wage once in your life, you'll be like, something's got to change about this right now. So feeling those things just sort of motivated me to keep doing that. So then I graduated from law school, and they're like, psych, no, girl, it's no jobs. So I couldn't get a union job immediately upon graduating, but it was okay, because I knew that this was a fight I wanted. It was something that was an amazing tool, right? Like, who doesn't want to lawyer in a way where you can get hundreds of people their jobs back? And especially as a Black person in America, right? I have to credit Mark for introducing me to AFL-Randolph. I'm ashamed to say it wasn't until he came to my 2L law school class and told me about him that I even knew of him. But when I did, AFL-Randolph says something about basically there are no civil rights without economic rights. Like, what does it matter if public accommodations are desegregated if you can't afford to go in there? Like, you can't afford to eat at the, not segregated restaurant. What good does that do you? So I think about that, and I think about all the time, especially when I was a law student and struggling to get my first labor job. And it was funny too, because I used to also beg Mark for jobs. I'd be like, let me get a job, please. So I clerked in the interim. And then finally, when the house flipped, I sort of got the opportunity to, be a labor lawyer. And that's what I'm going to be from now forward. So that's my story.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin. Jason, you get to follow that up.
Yeah, it's very hard to follow up those 4 interesting stories. I mean, I had some prepared remarks that I was going to say, but it's when you hear 4 Black attorneys talk about their parents guided them because they were all union members and got to where they are, and you see the success that they have now, it's just, it's inspirational. And I have a similar background, as my parents were union folks. My dad was a teacher. My mom worked at Hofstra University and was a secretary there, where I was able to go to school for free, basically because her union. It was a negotiated benefit. I did not start out by wanting to become a union lawyer. I really didn't know much about unions. I didn't even know union law was a thing until probably I got to law school. I was, it's not that inspirational. I wanted to make money. I was I think I matured a little bit later professionally than a lot of people. I was always like a year younger than everybody else in my class. And I think I matured a little bit later, but to know why I became a labor lawyer is to know my story. And I just want to share a little with you. But I grew up, and I always tell people, I grew up in New York, or I grew up in Hempstead, New York. I don't say I'm from Long Island. If you're familiar with Long Island, you'll know that it's a mostly affluent suburb of New York City. There's like 4 places on Long Island that are not, and Hempstead's one of them. I like to joke with people, we have more rappers per capita than a lot of other places, but that's for a different discussion. But nonetheless, I grew up in Hempstead, and I just wanted to go to law school from an early age. And my uncle actually got me a job, or referred me to get me a job doing education law when I was a 2L, I believe. So I was working at a firm that was pretty prominent on Long Island, and they did a lot of education law representing school districts, and they did some labor law as well too. And I was fortunate enough second chair in a few arbitrations. And I even did some, direct examination, some cross-examination well too. And I actually liked it. I enjoyed doing it. They made me an offer and I started there, and I was there for a couple of months, and it wasn't for me. There was something that just, the money was fine. The money was great, but I just could not wake up every day and represent the people who are trying to put my family out of business, fire my family, in other words. These are employers, my family was all workers. And that became real to me. Like, I saw that distinction, and I saw, representing management, their interests as opposed to individuals' interests. And it was very hard for me to wake up. So I quit. I just straight up one day quit. And this was in 2006. I think it was like right before the recession, or things were starting to get pretty bad. But I left. I just couldn't do it. And there was a short period of time for a month where I was just not working, not sure what I was going to do next. I was still living at home. And mind you, I was pretty young at the time too. I was in my early 20s. And I felt like everything was going to eventually fall in place. So I saw a job opening at a small firm in New York City. And they were looking for someone who had some familiar with arbitrations. So I was like, hey, this might be a good fit. So I applied, I told them my experience, and it was for a firm that did union work. They did a lot of discipline cases for an AFSCME local in New York, CSEA, and I managed to do it. And I was the only labor lawyer at the firm at the time. And believe it or not, 3 days later, I was responsible for handling someone was discharged that had been on the job for about 25, 30 years. And I was told there are arbitrations in 2 days and go do it. I don't recommend being thrown into the fire that way, but that's pretty much been the story of my life. And it worked out. I fortunately got his job back, but that's neither here nor there. But it just felt so different. I got paid a lot less money, but I was able to wake up with a smile on my face every day and go home and be able to sleep at night. And that was far more valuable to me than making a lot of money. And it just made my life so much easier. And from that moment on, the things that we're talking about today, economic justice, being able to represent people that look like you and your family and your friends and the people that you go, all of that started to fall into place. It came together and it clicked for me. So I really did mature late professionally, and then none of that stuff was on my mind at the time. My mind was only focused on being able to make a lot of money and being a young Black man in New York City in his 20s who's a lawyer. But a lot of this other stuff really clicked for me, albeit a little bit late, and it really did. And from that moment on, for the last 15, 16 years, it's just been a match made in heaven. I love my job. I love representing labor. I love being a part of a movement. And I really want more Black people to be in this movement as well, too, as labor lawyers. So
Thanks.
Sorry if I rambled a bit.
No, not at all. And on that, I'm glad you said that, because that's a good transition into my next question. So as most of us know, the legal profession is the least diverse profession in the United States. And speaking from personal experience, and I'm sure all of you would agree, it can be challenging to be one of the few Black lawyers in your field. So tell me a little bit about how you've dealt with those challenges and how you think about your identity in your work. Bart, let's start with you.
Sorry, a little trouble unmuting there. Yeah, it's a really good question, Kyle, and it's one that I think every Black labor lawyer has to address, and it's something that we talk about as a bar, the Black attorneys in the labor bar often. I think the way I address it is by knowing how important the work I'm doing is to the Black and brown community. As we know from the panel last week and just from history. And, like Caitlin said, labor rights and civil rights are intertwined. And so every day that we come to work and do this, I know that I'm working for Black and brown people, and my work shows that. I think that with increased education and increased knowledge, the bar will grow and we'll be able to continue. But I think that there's a lot of progress to be made, but that doesn't make the work we're doing any less important or any less vibrant. And when you see the impact it has on a worker's life, whether they're in a union or not, I mean, a lot of union work that I do at the AFL-CIO and even in my previous jobs, we help workers that aren't even in unions. We help workers that are just collectively organized, and workers who knows that they've been treated wrongly. And that work is what keeps me coming in every day. And the labor movement is just like any other part of our society. It has its pains and it has its progress that it needs. And the fact that we have those pains doesn't mean that it's not worth working for or working in. So that's how I approach it.
Caitlin, what about you?
I mean, it's hard. I think, truth be told, right, it's something you have to face as a Black attorney in any field, because again, to your point, Kyle, there are very few. And especially as a Black woman, it's like, the sexism and the racism, the intersection of both, and then probably like a working class person. I don't know what y'all's experience was, but in law school, I remember a lot of my classmates' parents were lawyers. So are you like, oh, okay, like I'm first time here, okay. Like, I don't know. So sometimes that can be alienating and challenging, but I think that's a challenge you would face regardless. And I also remember, to Bart's point, like the people we represent or that you're fighting on behalf of often look like us and not the people who represented them. Even in the, typically a lot of workers that were represented by unions are people of color. So like, we should be their lawyers. Like, we are of them. It's one community. And I also think I lean into it. Like, I've had conversations where bringing my identity and experience even into a labor conversation has shaped the narrative in a way that's been really important to me on issues where there's an intersection between civil rights and collective bargaining. Like, top of mind to me comes like, thinking about policing, because I did work on public sector collective bargaining. So, as a Black woman in that space, I think it was important that I was there, and I was grateful to be there because I could then encourage the conversation and moving away. I don't think it would have if I had not been in the room. So I think, thinking about, I need to be there, and also just thinking about if somebody has to fight, and like, I'm lucky to have this opportunity to do so. If I just have to feel uncomfortable because I'm the only one, so what? Because people are losing wages, right? People are losing jobs, people are losing houses. So like, at a certain point, like, this is what I signed up for to do, was to fight.
Jason, what about you?
Can you just repeat the question again for me, Kyle?
Sorry, no, sure. I just, let me pull this up real quick. Yeah, so tell me a little bit about how you've dealt with the challenges of being one of the few Black labor lawyers, and how you think about your identity when you go to work.
So I have two different experiences. One was in New York City, and another is in I guess my time after, well, let's say before and after TW Local 100. TW Local 100 is one of the most militant labor unions ever, right? They were responsible for the transit strike in the early 2000s. They're just a great place to work, and a great union. And one of the great, I had a fantastic experience there. What was unique about TW Local 100 is that the legal department, and this is a union of about 25,000 members, but the legal department consisted of 6 or 7 attorneys, 6 of which were people of color. I've never experienced that at the time, but it was just such an incredible, I never experienced since then. And at the time it was very new for me, but it was just a remarkable experience to be around so many lawyers of color who are fighting for labor rights. Since then, That has not been the case, and that doesn't happen a lot. And it's an interesting feeling. Sometimes, I think Caitlin mentioned it before, from even in law school, I mean, you get this feeling that you don't belong, that why are you here? How did I get to law school? All these people have these other, advantages ahead of them. They're going to succeed and I'm not. And especially for a Black attorney, I mean, that feeling comes up. Even 15 years in the game now, I still get that feeling. I had an arbitration yesterday, a contract arbitration, and look, the stakes weren't that high for it. And I've been doing arbitrations for a long time, and I feel like I'm pretty decent at it. Nonetheless, it was over an issue that I wasn't too familiar with. I spent a lot of time preparing for it, but I was going against other attorneys who were far more experienced than I was. Why did my client want me to handle this case? Like, I'm just a Black kid who is just learning how to, I'm still only 15 years in the game. These guys are far more experienced than I am. Why me, right? So fortunately, we had a prep for this call a couple of days, I think the day before on Tuesday night. And we were talking about some of the talking points and things that we were gonna say to you all and reflecting on our careers a lot. And then it clicked on me, right? Like, I made it. I got to where I am because I'm a good attorney, and not just a good attorney, a damn good attorney, right? So having that reflection as to reflecting on my career, reflecting on how I got to where I am, all of the hurdles that I had to accomplish from the time I was in college to get to law school, passing the bar, getting my first job, working my way up from TW Local 100 and going on and on and on. That really gave me a shot of confidence. And I say that to you, I think it's important when you're in law school to realize, yeah, you're not a lawyer yet, but you're close to it. And don't forget the struggle that you had to do to get to where you are. Being a Black law student is an exceptional thing, and you should never take it for granted. And when you do, when you start to question yourself, when you start to see your other white colleagues or other colleagues who have advantages that you don't have, reflect on what you did to get where you are. And I think that'll give you a little extra boost. And I always wish I had somebody to tell me that early on. And maybe that doesn't work for everybody, but it definitely worked for me. And the arbitration went fine. So when you do feel that way, I mean, I just think it's something that you should really try to do and reflect on your accomplishments and think about, how you got to where you are.
Thanks, Jason. That's very important. Samantha and Mark, the two of you have been labor lawyers for, everyone here has been a labor lawyer for much longer than me, but for longer than the rest of us on this panel as well. So I'm, the original question about how you think about your identity in your work, but I'm also curious as to how that might have changed from when you were first starting out as a labor lawyer versus now. And Samantha, we can start with you.
Yeah, let me, it really has changed over the past 20 or so years. I totally identified with what Caitlin just said about that intersectionality, and really always felt right after graduation that I was being judged not only on the basis of race and gender, but age, right? Because you were always second guessed, right? As to memos or an opinion you would give. And I remember very early on in my career, I had received an assignment from a partner, and he said what he thought the law was. And when I did research, it was just the opposite. It was exactly the opposite of what he had said. And y'all don't know how much I went back and forth and forth and back and talked to this person and that person. And can you read this? Am I reading this right? And second guessing myself because really at that point, I would say it probably was more age related, right? And experience related than anything else. What I have done is I've always had mentors. I've always had people of color. There are two women of color who are my big sisters, and I run everything by them. And Mark is also someone I reach out to if I have questions. So I've always had a sounding board, and I have sought out sounding boards who are people of color because I had sponsors at the IA and in the law firm, and I was in the line for general counsel because two general counsels ago took me under his wing. So he was my sponsor, and so he took an interest in me. The former international president also took an interest in me and hired me into the international. So I've had sponsors in my career, but my mentors have been people of color and who have really tried, I could talk to about any and everything. And I also, the longer I've practiced, the more I realize that your whole self is very important in any case you take. And that while many of our members might not be of the same ethnic background as I am, I really hope that they value my competence, right? But I don't apologize for, right, or excuse or look for any way to say that I'm not a Black woman. That is who I am. I mean, and when I come in that room, I am a Black woman. And so I'm going to bring that perspective. I'm going to bring that experience with me. And I'm also going to bring all of my education, all of my legal experience, and my competence. So I agree with Jason. I deserve to be here, right? I have worked hard, and it wasn't anything that was given to me because of gender or race or some other, right, immutable characteristic.
Thank you, Samantha. Mark?
Well, I think they said it all, really. but I have a few things to say, and that is to echo Samantha. You can't deny what you are, because regardless of how you comport yourself, everybody is going to associate you with being a person of color, regardless. I've often had to deal with the question, well, what is the goal? To be the best Black lawyer that you can be? And I said, no. I got to be the best lawyer that I can be, because I'm already Black. And, as we all know, we're going to stay Black, right? And the question becomes, well, how do you handle that? In my situation, when I was in Buffalo and I was at the NLRB office, there was one other Black lawyer that was there, an older gentleman. And he, pretty much kept to himself. He was friendly to me, and we were able to let our hair down, but he was not going to really make any statements within that NLRB office. After I left and went into private practice, I was the only African-American labor lawyer, union side, in the entire city of Buffalo. And then on the occasion that I had a case in Rochester, lo and behold, I'd be the only African-American union lawyer in Rochester. And if I happened to have to go to Syracuse, well, I'd be the only African-American union side lawyer there too. So that was an indictment, but you had to think of that as an opportunity, because what happens is, as Jason has pointed out, as Samantha has pointed out, as Bart has pointed out, when you see the people that you're serving, invariably they're people of color. And some of the other lawyers would say, people are blue collar, they want you to look a little bit relaxed because they might feel bad about that because they're not in the same economic situation that you are. I said that was rubbish. People of color want their attorneys looking like attorneys, and they want their attorneys of color looking like attorneys. So when we showed up looking like attorneys. And the one thing that you have to deal with that insecurity, because you're going to have that insecurity, people are going to be looking you up and down. Your clients are going to be looking you up and down. Your building trades clients in particular are going to be looking you up and down. But what you got going for you, there's a little bit of street back there. You got street plus skills equal competence. Okay, so you remember that. You remember that you're not the only insecure person in that room. And it's kind of also interesting too, that the clients that I had, and I represented clients with SEIUs, CWA, and the building trades of in Buffalo. The women clients, the Nurses United, a lot of the CWA locals where they had women officers. I have to say, they wanted to hear what I had to say versus how I looked or what kind of qualifications I had. They wanted to hear what I had to say, and they wanted to discern whether or not I was listening. And so what made me be significant in private practice is the fact that I was able to relate to the people that I was servicing. I was able to listen to their issues and discern from their issues, and then we could work on the problem together. And when I got their confidence, then I was able to reveal what I didn't know. Sometimes you feel like you could never say I don't know, because you feel like you're being judged all the time. But once you've established that you're the guy that they got to follow because you know better than them, then you can be the real counselor at law as well as the litigator. I had several situations where I didn't see the client until the day of the arbitration, and I'm prepping the client over the phone and prepping the grievance over the phone and whatnot. And then I get in my car and drive to the other city where the arbitration is going to take place, and have the business agent saying, "Hey, Mark, I didn't know you were a black man. I thought you were a Caucasian. Wow." And I said, "Well, I guess I'm bilingual." But we, did I sweat that? you know, you have to have a thick skin, and there's nothing better than to win, to demonstrate that, yeah, this is the kind of person that I am. And winning doesn't come from being a Black lawyer. It comes from being a good lawyer who happens to be Black.
Thanks, Mark. Samantha, to your point about mentors, when I was a law clerk at AFSCME in law school, I reached out to the lawyers in the office and asked them to put me in touch with some Black labor lawyers in DC. And two of the first people that I met were Angie Thompson, who I see in the audience, and Bart Sheard. So it's good to see both of you here. And later on, the AFL-CIO that next summer, through their minority outreach program, sent me to a conference where I also met Jason and Mark. And I had the pleasure to meet Samantha this week. So for those of you in the audience who are interested in labor law, the labor bar is good about connecting attorneys of color. And in this field, we really do all know each other. But so I'll ask one more question, and after that, I'll open it up to questions in the audience. So if you're in the audience and you have a question, you can go ahead and put it in the chat, and I'll try to get to as many of those as I can in the time that we have left. But before then, for any of you, and any of you can take this in any order that you'd like, what has been your favorite experience that you've had since you started practicing in this field?
My favorite experience, I guess two of the most meaningful ones have been, I don't know if I have a favorite, but I'll just say two of the most meaningful ones were, I participated in the organizing of front of house workers at the New Amsterdam Theater. And this was right when some would call it the Disneyfication of Broadway. But it was when Disney bought the New Am Theater and Lion King was going in. And the front of house workers looked like the passengers on the subway car. They were women, they were men, they were straight, they were gay. And to be a part of that, and to have a couple of the workers say that it made a difference that I was there representing them as an attorney of color, was something that I have not forgotten. And the other thing was organizing the stagehands at the Apollo Theater, all of whom looked just like I look. And that was after a 6-week strike. And my colleagues will tell you, you know, when your lawyer tells you, oh no, this will be very easy. They won't be able to get the show up, and we'll just call the strike, and by noon, we'll have a contract. Well, that was noon 6.5 weeks later that we got the contract, because there was a 6-week strike. And I was on that strike line with the workers every day. And the feeling when we got that contract negotiated and was signed, and it was something that was going to change the lives of all those stagehands, because from that moment forward, as Caitlin said, they got a real pension, not a 401k. They got health benefits. And on top of the pension, they got an annuity. So those were two of the most meaningful projects that I've been involved in.
Can I piggyback on that a little bit? You know, being a labor lawyer is a great thing, and you see a dynamic and power that you don't typically get a chance to really think about that much. At least I do. I see it a lot in the employee-employer relationship, worker management, however you want to call it. And for most of my favorite thing to do as a union lawyer is to negotiate. And I've served as chief negotiator for a number of negotiations both in New York City and even now here in DC, although to a lesser extent now. Nonetheless, it's my absolute favorite thing to do. And part of the reasons, as Samantha said, I mean, you're setting the terms and conditions of employment for a group of workers who maybe be their first contract, or maybe it's a successor agreement. But economics aside, and the back and forth aside, you have the chance to give workers voice, right? So I can't count the number of times and the satisfaction that I've got and people on my bargaining team have felt when I was able to yell at the employer. Just being able to yell at somebody who calls themselves a boss is satisfying in of itself. But when you have like 10 people sitting on the side of your table cheering you on, it feels even better. And it's not just yelling at them for the sake of yelling at them, but you're giving them, you're really saying what these workers are feeling. And they wouldn't ordinarily be able to do that if it wasn't for a union. I mean, if it wasn't for a union, they could get fired for saying something like that. But nonetheless, that is something that I really cherish and enjoy, just being able to yell at management. And I go back to it's a power dynamic, because it is. And you're speaking up for somebody. Now that I've been doing it for a long time, being the voice of the union or being the voice at a negotiation, I feel that that's less important for me now. What I like to do now is try to amplify the worker's voice. So now when we're negotiating, and if I serve as chief negotiator, giving that worker who the confidence to speak up on his own behalf, giving the nurse the confidence to talk about the working conditions at a hospital, being that support and being that amplifier is what is the most satisfying to me. Before it was just me doing it, but now to hear everybody do it. And I think it all comes back to this idea of collective action and being able to have that collective voice. So that for me is by far my favorite part of my job.
Real quick, I have 3 because I love being a labor lawyer. So, but really quick, on piggybacking on what Jason said about speaking truth to power. So one of my favorite moments reflecting is working on the Hill is getting to work on a bill called the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. And basically, when I told you that crazy long story about my dad getting laid off, this bill in some ways fixed that. So basically, it would penalize employers who do things like that, because currently there are no penalties in the law. And it also would do stuff like when a worker like my dad is making money because he's been illegally laid off, now that money doesn't get subtracted away from what they would owe you in terms of back pay. So all these things are great, but I got to speak truth to power, and then I got to fight with so many corporate lobbyists and yell at them on behalf of my dad and all the working people in the world. I mean, me and my buddy, Kyle DeCant, amazing labor lawyer, shouts to Kyle. We went tag team these crazy corporate lawyers. They did not know what they were walking into. And then just the moment that bill came down to the floor and passed, it was like we could burst into tears, because it was like, a huge deal to be a part of the process of literally fixing what tried to like break us. Like, bad employers like really tried to end my family. Y'all was coming for my life. And then I got to be on the team to like write the bill and to fight for the bill to pass, and then to be on the House floor and to see it pass. And then, I got to sit counsel for another bill, public sector bill, and I had my parents in the audience, and that was a really big deal too. And Congresswoman Fudge was sitting on the committee at that time still, and I got to write questions for her. And it was just a really huge, big deal for me, because, she was there for me when the struggle was very real, even in college, when I had first interned with her. So just, seeing that. And then my third favorite thing is just the hugs from workers. Like when you get to work with workers, or you take constituent meetings, or anytime I get a hug, I'm like, I feel you. I got you. I know. Like those are like moments where I'm like, set for life. So those are my favorite things.
Well, I have a couple. And it's hard to assess which is my favorite, but I would drop a footnote to Caitlin's story. It was a big rush too when Caitlin and Kyle and Chairman Scott's committee asked me to testify on behalf of the PRO Act, and They got me wise to all of the culprits that would be the problematic ones, and they were happy to see me get up there and start yelling at them too. And I got the chairman of the subcommittee to smile, so I knew I was saying the right things. So that was a big rush. But I tell you, the I were the more win an arbitration event has never won an arbitration before, where the employer has really dominated everything. And there's contract language that the employer has managed to ignore, and the local officers of the union really couldn't figure out how to tackle this and to get this straight. And you come in there and you go to arbitration and you win it hands down, and they look at you like you're this knight in shining armor and you were just doing your job. But the gratitude was immense. Or being the union counsel at an unfair labor practice trial, where the board attorney is the one who's supposed to take the lead because the NLRB is the prosecutor, but you're protecting the union's interest as the charging party, and you get a turn to do some cross-examination, and you hit a couple of home runs during cross-examination, and it delivers the win. And the union is saying, man, you should have been trying the case. So that gives you the real smile. And then there is the other time when you have a client that you might have represented in an employment situation where the client is talking to somebody else about some issue they had on the job, and they say, but I fixed them. I got Mark Pierce and he got me my job back. And I'm like, wow, that feels great. But the ultimate to me was just before I left to go to the NLRB after the president, I was honored to have the president nominate me. And I was going to go because I was getting a recess appointment. And I was in the office working late in an office building. My partners were really happy that I had gotten this position, but they let me know with no uncertain terms that I needed to clean up all my cases because they weren't doing it. So I was working late. And then I get a knock on the door, and I open up the door and I see about 6 janitors and housekeepers. And one of them is holding up the newspaper article that announced that I was selected for the NLRB, and they all applauded. And that's when I knew that I have to continue to make a difference because I was standing on their shoulders. That's all I got.
I'll bring up the rear by just echoing what Jason and everyone else said about, essentially using the powerful tools that we have, our legal skills and our minds, to change the balance of power and to make employers who always consider themselves to have all the power squirm. And I think that's extremely important. A campaign that will always stick with me is a campaign I worked on behalf of my union clients to fight on behalf of workers who weren't even in a union. I think a lot of times people think of unions as these gigantic organizations who don't deserve to be considered real worker empowerment tools, and they actually are. I mean, at the base of a union is just a worker. And So, these workers were construction workers in Maryland, and the employers, many employers in Maryland and nationwide, have business models that are based solely on taking advantage of workers. They only are able to exist because they take advantage of workers. And in this case, specifically taking advantage of Latino workers who they know may be more vulnerable, may not speak the language, and may not understand how to make sure their rights are enforced. And so I was able to work with, on behalf of the union, who wasn't even representing these workers, be able to make sure that they were given the correct pay and benefits that they were entitled to. And that type of work is extremely important. I think that we have the power to use our tools in a number of different ways. And I think that for me, and I think I speak for my colleagues, that it's extremely important for us on all these campaigns that were so impactful to use the powerful tools that we have in our minds to do good work and to represent workers. So, the kind of breadth of the labor movement and being able to work on education issues, for nurses and healthcare, for teachers, for run the gamut. These campaigns are everywhere, and workers everywhere need our help. And so, that's kind of, each campaign brings a different victory or loss. But we at least I wake up every morning excited to continue these campaigns and to keep doing good work.
Thanks, everyone. Those were wonderful responses. I'm going to take these questions a little bit out of order, and we're going to get to as many of them as we can. But I'll start with, and anyone can take any of these, what advice do you have for someone getting ready to graduate and look for a job in this field, specifically factoring in the current state of the job market under COVID?
I would say, because I'm probably the closest to jobs, make a long list, apply actively everywhere. I mean, honestly, don't limit yourself geographically, because since we're in COVID, you might actually sort of have a leg up in that you could be remote working. But I'll say this, think about union side law firms, think about the federal government. I mean, there's the FLRA, the NLRB, there's the DOL. There are 3 major labor agencies. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. You could work either in the Senate or the House. I mean, I sort of made a long list, and I was unsuccessful, but I think that you would have a better chance than I did if you think really broad, because there are some things that I even missed out on. But there are tons of fellowships that you could do remotely at unions. I mean, like SEIU, AFT, NEA, AFL-CIO, they all have union side fellowships that are sort of 1 to 2 year terms for people who are recent grads. So if anybody wants to talk really in detail about all the things and all the places to apply, I'd be happy to give you my email, because I sort of try to keep tabs and lists. And there are some listservs out there too about what jobs are opening up.
And I understand that in the chat of last week's program, there was some information being provided by some general counsels and some attorneys with NEA, inviting people to contact them to discuss possibilities and ways and methods of searching. I agree and echo what Caitlin has to say about the approach that you have to take. But you also have to consider this. You have to understand that the anatomy of a union firm is a little bit different than that of a management firm or a general or mega firm. There's no hiring season for a union firm. Union firms are generally substantially smaller. The average firm than 5 attorneys. A large union firm is 20 attorneys. That's like probably a national firm. You need to make yourself known. You need to be at the point where, when they're looking for people because of the openings, that you are part of a network where your name would would be under consideration, because, and it's through for no fault of your own, unions, when they have a need, or union firms have a need, they look around and they ask people that they know. They don't generally post. They don't generally solicit. They don't go to HBCs and say, I'm looking for a Black attorney. What they do is they go to their white colleagues and say, do you know that of any Black attorneys? Because we need some diversity. And usually everybody is like, well, I know. Okay. So that's never a good system. So this is the system that you're working with. Secondly, there's always the concern that when your resume is shown, it's not going to look like a resume of somebody who is trying to find a job in union side labor law. So if you have that cookie cutter resume that you're sending out to everybody, you're going to have to change that up. You need to prepare your resume specifically for the type of job that you're looking for. You Google the firm that you're applying for, you see where their specialty areas are. You try to strike some kind of familiarity in your experience with that, with the service or the history that the firm has, and try to make those kind of matches. Lots of times, and more often than not, law school graduates are coming out of law school without the opportunity to take labor law courses. I was listening to Jason the other day when he was talking about it. If you don't have a labor law course, what are you doing about with your volunteer work? If your parents are union members, is there a publication that the local has or the international has that you could possibly do some volunteer work on? Are you establishing something that can demonstrate that you have a commitment to public interest? And it may not be labor, because labor may not be in your background, but a demonstration that you're interested in public interest is going to be valuable to be able to lay out. And then in terms of what are the union firms out there? Well, you try to find out every union firm in this country, and you can do that by saying, hey, I'm a law student, I want to come union side. I understand that the AFL-CIO keeps a list of union lawyers. Maybe they will let you know where to look, show you that list. They'll show it to you. Alex will show it to you quickly, so you're going to have to write fast. But seriously, you'll be able to get information that I've never even thought about when I was looking. That is so much available these days.
Thanks, Mark. I'm not going to answer many of these, probably any of these other questions, because I am not a panelist, I'm the moderator, but as someone who was applying during the COVID-19 pandemic to jobs, I wanted to mention that I put in the chat the Union Lawyers Alliance's Career Corner, which is public. So the link is there, and it has all of the AFL-CIO affiliated law firms and unions and organizations throughout the country that are hiring at any one time. And it's updated monthly, an invaluable resource. So I just wanted to mention that. And one more thing that I will add, some unsolicited advice here. If you don't have labor experience, I, as someone who has hired law clerks for just one season now, I really look for an explanation of why you want to do labor law in your cover letter. So what might be missing in a resume, if you can make up for it in your cover letter, if you have if a story or a general interest, or you explain kind of why you want to work for a union or for a union side labor law firm, if that's what you're doing. then I would definitely put that in there, because we're all movement people. You know, we all, it really matters that the people who are doing this kind of work care about this kind of work and are interested in helping workers and their elected representatives in the labor movement. So
Kyle, somebody just dropped some good knowledge in the chat, and it's appropriate. That if you're specializing in tax, ERISA lawyers are looking for you. So that is very, very helpful. I mean, so many, and you understand, ERISA law is gold. Most of us who are in the trenches that are doing traditional labor law or employment law, the thought of trying to do ERISA law makes you real nervous. Those people who have those kind of tax backgrounds and they can get into ERISA law will never lose a job.
So we just got another great question from Destiny. What does a normal day look like for you as a labor lawyer? And anyone can jump in here. Jason, you're smiling. Let's start with you.
I just don't know that there is a normal day, which is part of, you know, what makes this job great. You know, you wake up every day, you know, you have something planned, or you think you have a schedule planned for the day. Then you get a call from your client in the union saying that, you know, there's some issue with management and I don't know how to handle it. And you know, that takes up your entire day. So it really varies. You have to be able to be flexible and very responsive to your clients. I could count the number of times. I mean, I do negotiations, I do arbitrations, some litigation every now and then. I represent the union as an employer. So in any one of those fields, an issue could come up on a daily basis that'll just take over my entire day. So whether you're in-house or whether you're working for a firm, it really varies, but that's the excitement of it. I mean, I think it keeps you on your toes. You don't really know what to expect. And it just keeps things fresh. So I laugh because I just don't know that there is really a typical day.
I would agree with Jason. I think for ERISA lawyers, there could be a typical day because you got to love that tax code, because
Right.
that's what you are doing. I mean, that is ERISA. It is great work. I agree with Chairman Pierce that you likely will never be looking for a job because it is highly specialized and probably more routine or routinized than the labor side. I can tell you all, with this pandemic, my days are much longer. I am working harder than I've probably ever worked in my life, longer hours than I've ever worked in my life. I have 3 colleagues, I think 2 of whom are on this call, and they are working as hard as I am, and I don't think we have had a typical day. Our industry is one where we represent workers in live theater and in live performances. And as you all know, those things have been sidelined temporarily since last March. So we are doing lobbying. We are helping every way we can. So there has not been a typical day. I agree with Jason though. I would change this pandemic if I could. But the fact that my days are different and I'm not, I think, you know, when you're on the corporate side, it really is more rote, right? Where you go in and you're doing research, and then you're a 4th or 5th year associate and you're still doing document production, right? You may never have met with a client. Well, I can tell you as a labor lawyer, within probably 4 months, you're handling arbitrations, you're meeting with clients, and you are directly impacting lives. So I think that there is not a typical day unless I have a brief due or a position paper and I have to block out time, and then I am really doing research and writing. But each day has been different. I don't think I've had 2 similar days since I started doing union side labor law.
As a policy person, I think I also have varied days, but it's a little bit different because I don't represent clients. So when I was on the Hill, something that's interesting is, right, I would write bills. So you're thinking about labor law in a different way instead of like, how can I use the law to benefit my clients, or like, or what are my clients saying that fits within the law? I'm thinking about like, what is, in the previous administration, I was thinking about what is the Trump administration doing that we want to fix in our bill we want to prevent them from doing anymore, or how can we improve federal labor law, and then putting that into text. And then it's really interesting because we sort of are internal lobbyists, so then we're also working internally to convince people within our caucus and also across the aisle to get on the bill and support it. And sort of like, how do you get things through the legislative process? Like my day was around that. And then it would also be, educating members of Congress on what does this bill do? So ironically on the Hill, not everybody knows what all the bills are. So when you work on a committee as a policy person, you're the person who knows what the bills are, and you educate everyone else, like the staff and the members, and then sort of sitting counsel in markups and hearings, being that person to explain. And then you also do get like sort of, I guess, a client relationship or experience with workers, and when you sort of bring them in as witnesses to testify as hearings, so then you get that opportunity to sort of give them the opportunity to give their voice and their experience on how this legislation is helping them in Congress. So you also pick the witnesses. So you work with stakeholder groups to select witnesses. You also sort of have like this interesting back and forth with stakeholders that are friendly to your causes and that are also opposed to them. So you take all the meetings with any companies, small businesses, large businesses, and also unions, who, whatever, you're sort of that first line of defense and that person who's in those meetings as the subject matter expert. So I think I sort of have a different experience in that, I'm sort of in the policy side. And that's still sort of similar even in my role now, where working at DOL, I still think about policy and sort of how do you get how does the federal government get policy out, and what is that process?
Great. So in the interest of time, I'm going to ask one more question. There are a lot of excellent questions in the chat. Some of them are pretty specific. Many of us dropped our emails in the chat. So in the next couple of minutes, please go ahead and make sure you copy those so you can reach out to any of us. But the last question I will ask is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to law students in the audience that you wish you knew when you were in law school?
Can I take that? And this is going to be pretty quick. Everything that Mark just said, like, is phenomenal. Like, that's the best. When that question was asked, that's probably the best response, not just from a union lawyer, but from a lawyer that I've heard to law students before. And I've been on a lot of these career panels, but everything he said was accurate. So the one thing I do, and I did meet Mark early on in my career, and it was funny. He really pulled me into this whole union lawyer family that's out there, because we were at a meeting for a client, and we were the only 2 people of color, I think, in the room. And he approached me. He really stepped up and came to me and pulled me aside. And it really helped my growth and development, knowing that there are other attorneys of color that represent unions out there, but just the fact that he really did that. So putting that aside, everything that Mark said, and I'm glad this is recorded, because that is very sound, practical advice that you guys can really walk away with this from.
All right, I'll buy you a drink.
I think one thing I wish I knew when I was in law school is just to relax and to be flexible. I was I was so caught up in everyone else's timeline and in trying to keep up with everyone else that I would tie myself in knots about what I was going to do and then try to reach these different thresholds. And I think that especially if you're interested in labor law, you got to be flexible and you got to just trust yourself. I mean, you're here for a reason and you have the skill set and you have the tools and you have the know-how. So, you know, just keep on working and you'll get there. I didn't get my job after 3L until I had already taken the bar, I think. So, and I've been employed ever since. So I think, you know, if you just take your time and trust yourself, you'll be all right and just calm down. Everything's gonna be cool.
I agree with Jason and with Bart. I probably was more like Bart. I was very routinized. I went straight from college to law school. Like, you know, I majored in political science and I went right to law school and I left law school and then I've got a clerkship. I did everything by somebody else's book or timetable. And I often wonder, because right after college, I was offered a position on the state paper in Louisiana. And I wonder if I maybe had detoured a couple of years, would it have been different? I would also say, don't limit yourself. The labor field is so big. I never thought about doing policy work like Caitlin has done, right? I knew about, of course, the Department of Labor and you know about the Department of Justice, right? But I never really thought about maybe I could affect labor policy as opposed and affect workers that way, right? Like changing laws that actually will change, you know, the worker-employer relationship. So maybe take some time and think about just how much is available to you.
I'd like to echo that, Samantha, because the one thing that I didn't know, and that is the panoply of opportunities and variety of practice within the area of labor law. The National Labor Relations Board gives you a good example. If you're in the regional offices, you're investigating cases, you're trying cases, you're writing decisions, and you're conducting elections. So you're boots on the ground, more or less, which was an exciting thing for me. I wouldn't do it any other way because I'm that kind of a lawyer. But when I became a policymaker, when I had the privilege of going to the board as a board member and then as chair, I was surrounded by super smart young attorneys that the vast majority of their experience was reading the transcripts, the briefs, and understanding the cases and drafting the decisions. They were the clerks of the board members. Now, if your strength is in writing, if you like to savor the law and because your abilities as a staff counsel for a board member is not just to be able to write, but to be able to communicate your position as to why the board member should vote in that particular direction based on your research and your oral advocacy. So all of that works. You're always going to have to talk as a lawyer, as a union lawyer, as a public interest lawyer, because you got to persuade. But if you feel more comfortable, if you think that your thing is in the area of writing, then there are opportunities there. If your thing is in the area of tax law and you got to convince a board of directors or a pension fund that you got to make these kind of moves because these regulations have changed and we have to reconstruct things in a particular way because of the particular tax laws, that's what you should be doing. If your boots on the ground, you want to be in there with the people, you want to be face to face with the workers, you want to advise. There was a question here as to whether or not a person can be an attorney and an organizer at the same time. They don't have job descriptions that say that, but most union attorneys are movement attorneys. If you got unions as your clients, what they want is a movement attorney. The local president, when they bring you to the picket line, you're a movement attorney. Or when they're yelling at the picket line about no justice, no peace, you're yelling too. And you're not only practicing labor law, invariably, you're going to be practicing criminal law because somebody's going to get arrested and you're going to have to get them out. So there's a whole lot of skill set and there's a whole lot of variety. But the overarching thing that you got to remember if you want to come this way, and we want you to, and that is you got to have passion, because it's not what you do when you're a union lawyer, it's who you are. And that's the difference between what we do and what they do on the other side of the table.
Caitlin, I think you're last if you have something you want to say.
I'm not gonna hold these people. They get it. They know it. We want to welcome them. They know where to hit us up. I'm not gonna hold them.
Right. Well, thank you
I
so
will.
much.
I will. I have something I want to say real quick, and it's more to everything that Mark said. I mean, I think he nailed it. But I mean, when you're a law student, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget the trials that got you to where you are. You are a success. Being a Black law student is being a success. You are exceptional, and don't forget that, because confidence goes a long way. And I look for that when I'm hiring. I'm sure everybody else does too. No matter what you do, don't forget where you came from, and don't feel belittled or don't feel small because some of the advantages that your colleagues may have. Remember the struggles that you have gotten to where you are, and let that guide you and let that be your passion. That's all.
Well, thank you so much, Jason, and thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to Alex and everyone at the AFL for helping set this up, and also especially to Jalen and the folks at Inbalsa. This was a wonderful conversation in my view, and I really appreciate all of you that came out and listened, and I hope you took a lot from it. So,
can I say one thing? Kyle, you were an outstanding moderator.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Kyle, I second that, and I think you have another career ahead. You are an excellent moderator.
If this doesn't work out and AFSU doesn't want me anymore, I'll consider it. But, happy to be here doing both. Thanks, everyone. Y'all have a good night.
All right.